One of the benefits of having the author of a book in the room is you can, as you're reading the book, you can ask him a question. Whereas if I was reading this without Bill Shelby, so Bill, I've put it this way. I just want to lead into this. So last week we read, and I just want to put that, I wrote it on the screen. So last week in chapter 16, meanwhile out in Akron, we learned of the great differences between New York and Akron. With New York only having just started to call itself Alcoholics Anonymous, and Akron still very much embedded in the Oxford group. Now, by this time, the New Yorkers had proudly adopted the name. We learned that last week, Alcoholics Anonymous, along with the completely separate identity that this name implied. And then you said that the Akron people, Bill Wilson ruefully noted, were, quote, still thinking they were Oxford groupers, end quote. And as such, they were, quote, dubious of doings in New York. But here, and this is from this week, you said this week, throughout 1938, there were only 2 Alcoholics Anonymous meetings in the world, one in Brooklyn on Tuesdays and the other held in Akron on Wednesday night. The rest of it I don't need to know. So my question, I don't know what would answer to this question. I thought this was the best way. What was your reason? Because obviously you knew the 2 of those things that I've just read. So what was the reason behind saying there were 2 AA meetings in the world when last week we read that one was only calling himself Alcoholics Anonymous and the other was still part of the Oxford group? Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Of course it makes sense, David. I mean, I wasn't confused by the question when you sent it to me. It's just that it's a confusing answer. You know, it's I've thought about it since I gave you my first knee-jerk reaction in those emails we exchanged in the past week. It seems to me it's almost a semantic problem we're talking about, you know. Now, I certainly did say there were 2 AA groups, you know, Tuesday and Wednesday meeting in 1938. I said that, but yeah, there's evidence to the contrary that certainly today a lot of people, I don't think anybody in AA would recognize what was going on in Akron in January of 1938 as a comfortable AA meeting today. You know, they just wouldn't recognize that at all. And I've made the argument, you know, as you well know, I think that December 10th, 1939 is the birthday of Alcoholics Anonymous because there was no 12-step program being offered until April 10th, 1939. And how could you have something that I have a hard time calling something AA that doesn't include the 12 steps. So there's that. But of course, there was no 12 steps back in January of 1938, for instance, you know, 15 years, 14 months earlier than that. So I think it's a little bit of semantics. And I really, the reason that when I wrote that, I said there was 2 AA groups, you know, what it meant to me. Well, first of all, I don't want to say there's a group of guys in Akron who were going to turn into AA, but they weren't AA yet. They were an action group. And then there was these guys in New York, and they were meeting, and they were doing it kind of like what we're doing today, but they didn't call themselves AA yet because Jimmy, the name didn't even get invented till the earliest, the first week of June of 1938, blah, 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 you know, that kind of thing. But what was happening was, you know, I've got friends who say, you know, people were staying sober on fellowship before the 12 steps. So you can be in AA and be sober and not even pay any attention to the 12 steps whatsoever. And you know what? I stayed sober like that for 20 years. I didn't pay attention to the steps for 20 years. I mean, I went to step meetings and blah, blah. I talked about the steps, but I hadn't actually done them all. And so I think it's a matter of semantics more than anything else. Were there people staying sober before the book came out on April 10th, 1939? Yeah, they were. And were they staying sober basically through fellowship and what we might call, to be more general, trying to get themselves a vital spiritual experience of some sort to stand between them and the first drink? Yeah, they were doing that, you know. My friend who says, you know, you don't have to do the 12 steps, they were staying sober on fellowship. Well, they're staying sober on fellowship and getting on your knees and surrendering to Jesus is what they were doing. So you got to be careful about that, you know. We'll just do whatever they did before the 12 steps were done. Oh, really? Really? Let me tell you, how's that Oxford group meditation thing going for you every morning? And what's your recent notes on that? So yeah, it's the beauty of the book being published with a program of here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. You know, it's like, I don't know how you could call. I mean, there are groups that don't do the 12 steps and they consider themselves an AA group. I mean, Wilson said any group that gets together and calls itself an AA group is an AA group. Okay, so let's get over that. There's this flexibility built into it. But when we try and bring some sort of rigidity is the wrong word, but we're trying to bring some substance to it, talking about it. Yeah, you're right. I probably put too much substance in it when I said that there were two AA groups, Tuesday and Wednesday in 1937. 1937, those were going on. Actually, 1936, those were going on. So, yeah. Bill Wilson was deep in the Oxford group in 36 and 30 and the first part of 37. So it's a great question, David. It really, really is, because it brings, any kind of substantive answer to it is not a one-liner. It's a complicated question. So does that satisfy?
Absolutely. But I listen back to that again. I will listen back. No, I appreciate that you're doing this. And my favorite presentation of yours, I have many of, but Bill's vision and his ever-changing plan. You said you're researching that, because I've listened to that and I transcribed it, and I think it's an incredible presentation and the amount of information. But you saying that you changed your view on Clarence Snyder after the research you've done for that presentation. Is that a fair take on what?
Yeah. I mean, I always thought Clarence saying the first AA meeting was held, on April 24th or whatever the date was up in Cleveland, when he did it based no more Oxford group people, and we're going to use this book. That's what we're going to do. So, yeah. I mean, if I'm making an argument that that the real birthday of AA is April 10th, 1939, then Clarence's contention that he had the first meeting holds a bunch of water. You can certainly see from his perspective what we're talking about here. It's funny, I'm tutoring a woman, and we've been spending 3 weeks reading Nietzsche. And Nietzsche's all about different perspectives. Look at the perspective, and then move over here and look at the perspective here, and then look at the perspective over here, and towards the perspective over here. It's like that kind of a thing. So from the perspective of, if I'm going to be a hard liner about the real birth of Alcoholics Anonymous was April 10th, 1939, then I got to give Clarence some credit. I really have to give Clarence some credit. But on the same token, those people in Cleveland they said they weren't inviting any Oxford group people to the meeting, but they're still doing the four absolutes.
Oh.
I mean, you can go out to Cleveland and Akron today, and you you just rub, the very surface of what's going on there, and somebody's going to tell you about the four absolutes. I mean, it's happened to me 5 or 6 times. So that's what they're doing out there. And you know what? They're not drinking.
That's bottom line. And context is king. That's why I got this, because you've drilled into it since we've been.
Yeah.
Context is king. Your sponsor used to tell you all the time. Ernie
Kurtz used to beat me over the head with that 2x4 with regularity.
Ernie Kurtz used to tell you. Thank you, Bill. I appreciate that. I'm sure everyone else appreciate that. We have it. I'm going to put it up on our WhatsApp. I cut that out and I put it up on our WhatsApp group later on. So we're in chapter 17. As you just heard, we're with the author Bill Schaberg. We've also got Jim Worley with us. Jim is, of course, done a presentation for us last night, and Jim is with AA History only on Facebook. So we're on chapter 17. It's titled Working with Others, and it's October to November 1938. And with that, we're over to Seattle to Kit.
Thank you. October 1938 was a busy month for Bill Wilson. During the first week, he lost the support of the Rockefeller trustees when he rejected the advance from Harper & Brothers and then became immersed in all of Parker's publicity ventures, in parentheses, not the least of which required the two of them to visit the managing editors of both Good Housekeeping and Reader's Digest, end parentheses, plus all of Hank's frantic efforts to launch the stock offering for the 100 Men Corporation. Yet, somewhere in the midst of all that furious activity, Bill found time to do major revisions on the 2, quote, rough, uncorrected outlines, end quote, he had sent to Bob Smith at the end of September, and then produce first drafts of 3 completely new chapters, all 5 of which, as already noted, were mailed off to Dr. Bob for his review on November 3rd.
Bill Wilson's working relationship with Ruth Hawk. Throughout October, Bill had been, quote, commuting every day from 182 Clinton Street, that's in Brooklyn, to Newark, end quote, where he gave Hank whatever help was needed, and then spent the rest of his day working on the book. Now, by this time, Honor Dealers quote, had gone broke, end quote, and there was, quote, nothing left but a very large desk and a few plush chairs for the customers, now empty, end quote. However, the, quote, big thing that was left was Ruth Hogg, who began to take Wilson's dictation on the chapters for the book under preparation, end quote. Now, as noted earlier, Bill didn't like Ruth taking shorthand notes as he talked. Instead, he preferred to stand behind her, speaking at a measured pace while she typed directly from his dictation. She would then hand him the typescript to read over before starting on a second version that incorporated his further thoughts and corrections. Quote, Ruth said, he liked to speak a while and then look it over, end quote. And he wanted it right then while his thoughts were working in the same vein. Reminiscing about these times in a 1955 letter, Hawke reminded Bill Wilson how he would
arrive at the office with those yellow scratch pad sheets I came to know so well. All you generally had on those yellow sheets were a few notes to guide you on a whole chapter. My understanding was that those notes were the result of long thought on your part after hours of discussion pro and con with everyone who might be interested. As I look at it today, the basic idea of each chapter of the book and the 12 steps is still essentially what you scribbled on the original yellow sheets. Of course, there were thousands of small changes and rewrites, constant cutting or adding or editing.
Ruth later added a bit more color to this picture by noting that Bill was a chain smoker who
would pace back and forth expounding his ideas, and at various intervals he would include his philosophizing off the subject using lengthy, flowery metaphors that would later have to be edited out.
These off-the-subject rambles sound perfectly reasonable if the only thing Wilson brought into the office was just a few notes to guide him on the writing of the whole chapter, as opposed to a more detailed outline for what he wanted to say. Lengthy extemporizing and flowery metaphors were very much in Bill Wilson's style, and it would have been hard for him to resist these two tendencies while working under such loosely organized conditions. Still, it's a captivating scene to imagine Bill standing behind Ruth Hogg, completely immersed in the creative process, suggesting numerous small changes and rewrites and making constant additions, deletions, and edits to the text. It was an unorthodox way to go about writing a book, and as he admitted to Bob Smith, these first drafts were far from well organized or polished prose. Quote, I'm turning this stuff out as fast as I can, being only once corrected dictation, he said, and concluded, quote, you can't call it serious writing. But the writing was getting progressively more, quote unquote, serious with each retyping, something Ruth claimed, perhaps with a bit of exaggeration, she had to do, quote unquote, at least 50 times before the book was finally published. However many times Ruth may have retyped the chapters, none of these interim copies were saved. So we have no record of the more polished October versions of More About Alcoholism or We Agnostics, nor were there any of the once corrected dictations for these 3 new chapters ever filed for future reference. This is unfortunate. While we have some idea of what was added and, more important, deleted from There Is a Solution and Bill's story, there are no complementary early drafts of any of these other chapters allowing for a similar comparison and analysis. As already noted, besides the 2 May-June chapters, the earliest available version of all the other chapters are found in the Multilith copy printed in mid-February 1939. And while the Multilith text is in many instances notably different from what was first published a little less than 2 months later, the changes made there were almost exclusively confined to specific word choices rather than to any significant additions or deletions. Access to any of these earlier ever-changing drafts might have shown substantial ongoing cuts and rewrites, but at this point it is impossible to imagine what those changes might have been. Still, the Multilith text is different enough from the published version to provide us with some important insights into Bill Wilson's evolving ideas about what should go into the book and how it should be presented.
One alcoholic working with another.
Although Hank had supplied a succinct description in the book of his mid-June outline, Bill needed no prompting to know that the first of his 3 new chapters, Working with Others, deserved a prominent and separate place within the work. In 1938, carrying the message of recovery to the suffering alcoholic was the central responsibility of every man who wanted to preserve his own sobriety, and by this time, the fellowship had amassed almost 4 years of experience, both positive and negative, from their many attempts at sobering up other problem drinkers. Dr. Bob's access to local hospitals regularly put him in touch with many alcoholics in need of help, while Bill's close relationship with Towns Hospital supplied a steady stream of prospects for the New York members. Beyond that, the word of their success was driving potential members toward the fellowship with growing frequency in both communities. Those years of solid experience made Bill's writing of Working with Others a much easier task than the more challenging chapters to the agnostic, or even the 2 that were already finished on alcoholism. Here, at least, was a much less controversial topic, one on which there was some general agreement between Akron and New York regarding what did and did not work when approaching a new prospect. If nothing else, over the past 3 years, they had reached an accord on 2 foundational principles for Alcoholics Anonymous. First, that the message of recovery was best delivered by one alcoholic speaking directly to another alcoholic, and second, that reaching out to help another alcoholic was the single most effective way to ensure their own continued sobriety. Both of these tenets were based on Bill Wilson's own experience as he struggled to stay sober, but they had been confirmed by the experience of almost every other early member of AA since then.
The meeting with Dr. Bob laid the foundation.
Bill's unqualified faith in these 2 principles was dramatically established in May of 1935 when he traveled to Ohio with a team of investors attempting to take over the National Rubber Machinery Company, a small Akron tool company. It was Bill's first substantial job since leaving Towns Hospital the previous December, and he was desperate to succeed, especially since he had been promised the presidency of the company should they win control. However, not long after his arrival in Ohio, it became clear that they were unlikely to secure enough proxy votes to win the fight. Wilson's partners in the venture went back to New York, leaving him behind to do his best, but with little real hope of success. Bill was stranded in Akron with just a few dollars in his pocket. It was depressing enough that Wilson had spent the previous 5 months diligently trying to get a number of different men sober without scoring even one success. Now the shining prospect of winning this proxy fight, along with the promise of a big job, looked as if it too would end in failure. Bill was bitterly disappointed, so much so that he suddenly realized just how dangerously close he was to picking up a drink. His quote-unquote white light experience at Towns Hospital was 5 months behind him, and he feared the impact of that event had grown so weak it might no longer be enough to keep him sober.
Alone now in the hotel, I paced up and down the lobby. There was a bar at one end, a church directory at the other. I would look into the bar where, it being Saturday afternoon, the local boys and girls were beginning to get an edge on. Then I would wander out and look absently at the church directory, listing the services to be held next day. Into the bar I finally wandered with a vague idea that I'd buy a bottle of ginger ale. Maybe I could scrape up an interesting acquaintance. Suddenly I got scared to death. I realized this was the beginning of the usual rationalization which led me to the first drink. Still walking back and forth between bar and church directory, my panic increased. The pull of the bar became terrific. I was really tempted this time, but still I could think straight. What should I do? Then I suddenly realized how much helping other alcoholics had helped me, even though none had got well themselves. I'd have to find an alcoholic in Akron and find him quick.
This is arguably the most seminal moment in AA history. Wilson's growing awareness that he might actually pick up a drink was followed by a startling new insight.
I realized as never before how working with other alcoholics over the previous 5 months had played such a great part in sustaining my original experience, and I thought to myself, I must find another alcoholic and help him so that I can remain free.
This was an historically important insight. While the thirsty Bill Wilson paced in the lobby of the Mayflower Hotel, it was not just his own sobriety, perhaps the whole future of AA, which hung in the balance. Fortunately, in his desperation, this self-described quote-unquote rum hound from New York decided his salvation lay in reaching out to another alcoholic, and he picked up the phone and made several calls, which eventually led him to the all-important meeting with Dr. Bob Smith. Footnote.
Footnote, another cottage industry among students of AA history are the many attempts to reconcile the different details offered at different times about the famous phone call. How many people were called before Bill made the all-important connection with the Reverend Tunks that led him to Henrietta Seiberling? Were the calls made from the phone booth, costing perhaps up to 50 cents for 10 calls? Or were they made from his room? Did the Oxford group people already know of Bill's presence in Akron? And were they already planning for him to help Dr. Bob Smith? Whatever the exact details, the connection was made, and Bill Wilson was introduced to Dr. Bob in their famous Carriage House meeting shortly after this.
These actions not only preserved Wilson's own tenuous sobriety, but also resulted in Smith eventually getting sober. Because of this incident, and so many more like it, which followed, Wilson believed that carrying the message to another alcoholic was the most foolproof way for the newly sober man to avoid picking up the first drink. In addition, this activity was acknowledged as a profoundly spiritual one in and of itself. The chapter Working with Others, parenthesis, as it appears in the Multilith printing, close parenthesis, opens with a strikingly strong statement establishing the privileged position that one alcoholic talking to another alcoholic held in the early fellowship. Quote, practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure your own immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. It works when other spiritual activities failed, end quote. Working with others was explicitly considered to be the single most practical spiritual exercise to ensure continued sobriety. And in case that important point had been forgotten by the reader as he made his way through the many details presented in this chapter, Bill firmly restated it just 6 paragraphs from the end. Quote, if you are spiritually shaky, he wrote, you had better work with another alcoholic, end quote. It was the very best way to preserve your own sobriety. Beyond the spiritual benefits of working with others, it must be remembered that throughout 1938, there were only 2 Alcoholics Anonymous meetings in the world, one in Brooklyn and on Tuesday nights and the other held in Akron every Wednesday. And at this time, the primary activity pursued by AA members was not going to meetings. It was trying to help another alcoholic get started on the path to sobriety. The practice of reaching out to others wasn't just one more element in the quest for sobriety. It was literally the most important thing early members did on a day-to-day basis in their efforts to stay sober. While most of the initial work with new men in Akron was being done during their hospital stay, the experience Bill describes in this chapter is more closely modeled on the methods used in New York, where the new man was typically approached either before he became a patient or immediately after he had left the hospital. In addition, it's important to note that the candidate approached in 1938 in both Ohio and New York were almost exclusively middle-class businessmen. In a contemporary letter, Bill confirms the desirability of this kind of candidate, noting that, quote, the type of alcoholic who recovers most readily is the man who has begun to get someplace in business and then is cut down by this hellish sickness, end quote. This was the kind of prospect most frequently approached with the new program of recovery, and the chapter Bill wrote detailing the best way to carry this message clearly reflected that fact.
Thank you. The salesman makes his case.
One of the most prominent features of Bill's writing style in the Big Book is his constant selling of the AA program. On page after page, Wilson's experience as a professional salesman consistently colors the way he presents his information. building an argument to successfully sell his conclusions to the reader, and then close the deal. Parentheses. Perhaps the most striking example is the one found in the chapter We Agnostics, which occurs after 5 pages of discussion on the necessity of adopting a belief in God. Quote, when we became alcoholics crushed by a self-imposed crisis we could not postpone or evade, we had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? Close quote, close parentheses. Over the years, some readers have been put off by this pervasive salesmanship, but selling is very much a part of Bill Wilson's style when it comes to the program of recovery. And his writing constantly veers in that direction as he drives home his points and tries to win each of the arguments he has set up. Working with others presents the most sustained example of this approach, as Bill opens the chapter with several pages of advice that sound like nothing so much as Sales 101 training course. After extolling the benefits of carrying the message to others, he cautions against approaching the newcomer like, quote, an evangelist or reformer, end quote, saying that kind of approach is likely to just, quote unquote, arouse prejudice. And he reminds the man making the pitch that, quote, to be helpful should be your only aim, end quote. He warns to ever present yourself as a temperance preacher or a prohibitionist, that those approaches have never worked with alcoholics in the past, and they will surely alienate your prospect. The first step Bill suggests for winning over a new convert is to know your prospect, one of the cardinal rules of salesmanship. And so he bluntly puts it, quote, find out all you can about him, end quote. He suggests that the man carrying the message should first talk to the prospect's wife to, quote, get an idea of his behavior, his problems, his background, the seriousness of his condition, and his religious leanings, end quote. Armed with this information, Bill says, the investigator should then be able to, quote, put yourself in his place, end quote, and so get some of, quote, how you would like him to approach you if the tables were turned, end quote. In other words, arrive with an approach that has already been carefully tailored to this particular man. The next traditional sales step would be to qualify your prospect. So Bill advises that, quote, it is wise to wait till he goes on a binge and then wait for the end of the spree or at least a lucid interval, end quote, when the family can ask him, quote, if he wants to quit for good and if he would go to any extreme to do so, end quote. If the man replies positively, then the family should mention that they know someone who has solved his own problems with drink and who tries to help others as, quote, a part of his own recovery, end quote. In short, Wilson suggests starting with the willing and hopefully hurting prospect who has already admitted he's open to suggestions for change. However, if the prospect rejects any help because he is still in denial about his problem, or if he thinks he can solve his drink problem on his own, then a bit of subversive advertising is suggested, a ploy that might be thought of as effectively using your promotional materials. In these cases, Bill advises leaving a copy of the book Alcoholics Anonymous lying around the house where he can see it in the hopes it will attract his attention during his next interval between drunks. If his disastrous drinking career hasn't already brought him to his knees, then perhaps reading about this powerful and proven new solution will capture his attention and arouse some hope in him. As a fairly strict rule of thumb, Wilson warns against approaching the prospect through his family and suggests the best way to make a proper impression on the new man is to secure a professional referral from a doctor or an institution. Bill strongly recommends medical help for those trying to get sober, noting that, quote, if your man needs hospitalization, he should have it, end quote. Then once he is a patient, quote, let the doctor tell him he has something new in the way of a solution. And when your man is better, let the doctor suggest a visit from you, end quote. Parentheses. Note how Wilson casually presumes that AA members already have a working relationship with a particular institution and at least one of the doctors who works there, as he and his group had with Dr. Silkworth at Towns Hospital. Close parentheses. Wilson was aware that by the time the typical drunk requires a hospital visit, he would likely be paying little or no attention to his family's incessant complaints, but that a professional opinion might break through the many layers of denial continually employed to justify his ongoing drinking career.
Gaining a new prospect's confidence.
Wilson then launches into several pages of step-by-step advice for how to approach and hopefully sell the new man on sobriety during the first visit. This particular section, which includes 14 substantial paragraphs that make up a full 1/3 of working with others, is actually the heart of the chapter. This first meeting is of paramount importance because failure here means no further contact with the man, while success guarantees at least the possibility of a second meeting. Speaking directly to the recovered member who will be visiting the stricken drunk, Bill suggests that he first gain the drinker's confidence by engaging, quote, in general conversation, end quote, with him, and then after a while turning, quote, the talk to some phase of drinking, end quote. Bill contends that by being candid about your own drinking career, about your, quote, habits, symptoms, and experiences, end quote, you should be able to convince him that, quote, you know all about the drinking game, end quote. Once he accepts you as someone who has had significant personal problems with drinking, quote, commence to describe yourself as an alcoholic. Tell him how baffled you were and give him an account of the struggles you made to stop, end quote. Having carefully prepared this groundwork, Wilson advises that now is the perfect time to explain to him about, quote, the mental twist that leads to the first drink, end quote. For this is truly the heart of the problem. Quote, if he's an alcoholic, he will understand you at once, end quote. If you've gotten that far with your new man, Bill suggests you, quote, continue to speak of alcoholism as a sickness, a fatal malady, and dwell on the hopeless feature, end quote, of the disorder caused by the, quote, the queer mental condition surrounding that first drink, which prevents normal functioning of the willpower, end quote. Explain to your prospect, quote, that many are doomed, end quote, because they never, quote, never realize their predicament, end quote, or ever come to understand just how insidious and deadly alcoholism really is. As you're concluding this gaining the client's confidence section by reciting, quote, your personal experience, end quote, Wilson warns you must be careful, quote, not to brand the new man as an alcoholic. Let him draw his own conclusions. If he sticks to the idea that he can still control his drinking, tell him that possibly he can if he is not too alcoholic. But insist that if he is severely afflicted, there is little chance he can recover by himself, end quote. By concentrating on the details of the problem and the revolutionary diagnosis of alcoholism as a fatal illness, parentheses, most clearly exhibited by the mental twist which inevitably produces the first drink, close parentheses, Wilson is cleverly trying to entice the listener into becoming an active participant in the conversation. Quote, even though your protege may not have entirely admitted his condition, he has become very curious to know how you got well. Let him ask you that question if he will, end quote. That is surely the ideal outcome, capturing the prospect's attention so completely that he begins to ask you for more information. But if he does not fall for that traditional sales ploy, then it is time to, quote, proceed with the rest of your story, end quote.
Spiritual principles in everyday language.
This necessitates introducing the idea of God, and Bill suggests dealing with this often problematic issue head on, no matter what a man's beliefs or lack of belief might be. Quote, stress the spiritual feature freely, he boldly advises, If the man be agnostic or atheist, make it emphatic that he does not have to agree with your conception of God. He can choose any conception he likes, provided it makes sense to him. The main thing is that he be willing to believe in a power greater than himself and that he live by spiritual principles, end quote. In dealing with non-believers, Wilson highly recommends using, quote, everyday language to describe spiritual principles, for there is no use arousing any prejudices, end quote, he may already have. And at all costs, avoid introducing any, quote, theological terms and conceptions, no matter what your own convictions, quote, end quote, might be. These would almost certainly be deal breakers. Even if your prospect already belongs to a religious denomination, you must still be careful in how you handle this topic of God, or he may know far more about the subject than you do. Quote, let him see that you're not there to instruct him in religion. Admit that he probably knows more about it than you do, but call to his attention the fact that however deep his faith and knowledge, there must be something wrong, or he would not drink, end quote. Why is it that his own very fine religious convictions have failed him in relation to alcohol while, quote, the general principles common to most denominations, end quote, which you have been using to stay sober are working so well for you? Perhaps it is because you have engaged in a number of actions demanded by those common principles. Obviously, quote, faith alone is insufficient. To be vital, faith must be accompanied by self-sacrifice and unselfish constructive action, end quote. Or as Bill would later write in the Into Action chapter, the program of recovery is, in essence, a, quote, spiritual program of action, end quote.
A program of action, not a crusade.
Having emphatically dealt with the necessary reliance on God, or at the very least on a power greater than himself, it was now time to start talking about the, quote, program of action, end quote. Bill suggests being very specific here. Tell the new man, quote, how you made a self-appraisal, how you straightened out your past, and why you are now endeavoring to be helpful to him. Show how important it is that he place the welfare of other people ahead of his own, end quote. Be prepared, for there may be a negative reaction to this. Having been given some idea of exactly what will be asked of him if he means to stay sober, quote, your candidate may give reasons why he need not follow all of your program, end quote. Do not be discouraged and, quote, do not contradict such views. Tell him you once felt as he does, but you doubt if you would have had made much progress had you not taken action, end quote. If nothing else, quote, maybe you have disturbed him about the question of alcoholism. That is all to the good. The more hopeless he feels, the better. He is then more likely to follow your suggestions, end quote. Returning once again to the theme that informs this whole chapter, Bill emphasizes that, quote, you will be most successful with alcoholics if you do not exhibit any passion for crusade or reform. Never talk down to an alcoholic from any moral or spiritual hilltop. Simply lay out your kit of spiritual tools for his inspection. Show him how they worked with you, end quote. While the words, quote unquote, crusade and reform have now lost most of their historical impact, a 1938 reader would have clearly understood them as referring to the temperance and prohibition movements that had so dominated the cultural and then the political life of the country for the previous 70 years. It must be remembered that prohibition had ended just 5 years before this, and anyone reading these words would have grown up under the shadow of those militant and increasingly effective political campaigns to banish alcohol. Similarly, the quote-unquote moral and spiritual hilltop mentioned here stands in for all of the preachers and ministers who railed so loudly against alcohol, or at least excessive drinking, in support of those two movements. According to Bill Wilson, these are two paths that members of Alcoholics Anonymous should never try to walk down. That would be fatal to your argument. Those approaches just do not work. Instead, the best way and most proven way to present your position is to tell your story in terms of what has worked for you. But even well-conducted first interview does not always produce the desired results. Perhaps he, quote, he is not interested in, he is not interested in your solution, end quote, but rather, quote, expects you to act only as a banker for his financial difficulties or a nurse for his sprees, end quote. If so, just, quote, drop him until he changes his mind. And if your prospect does not respond at once, do not be discouraged. Search out another alcoholic and try again. You are sure to find someone desperate enough to accept with eagerness what you offer. It's a waste of time and poor strategy to keep chasing a man who cannot or will not work with you, end quote.
The pitfalls of money and family.
But if you are successful and your man, quote, says he is prepared to go through with the program of recovery, end quote, then there are still several common pitfalls to be avoided, especially those surrounding money and family. Wilson knows that the man who is, quote unquote, broke and homeless may need some help getting a job and, quote unquote, a little financial assistance at times, and perhaps even a place to stay, quote unquote, for a few days. Bill cautions that taking someone into your house calls for, quote unquote, discretion to ensure that, quote, he's not trying to impose upon you for money, connection, or shelter, end quote, and that you also need to be sure, quote, he'd be welcomed by your family, end quote. But serious problems can still arise when working so closely with a newly sober man. Wilson graphically relates some of these, all of which are based on his own personal experience.
It may mean the loss of many nights' sleep, great interference with your pleasures, interruptions to your business. It may mean sharing your money and your home, counseling frantic wives and relatives, innumerable trips to police courts, sanitariums, hospitals, jails, and asylums. Your telephone may jangle at any time of the day or night. Your wife will sometimes say she is neglected. A drunk may smash the furniture in your home or burn a mattress. You may have to fight with him if he is violent. Sometimes you'll have to call a doctor and administer sedatives under his direction. Another time, you may have to send for the police or an ambulance.
But even if some of these are what must be done to achieve continuous sobriety, it's still an outstanding bargain. Bill cautions, however, that you must be vigilant and careful around all of these issues because, quote, the minute we put our work on a social service plane, the alcoholic commences to rely upon our insistence rather than upon God. And we simply do not stop drinking alcohol so long as we place dependence upon other people ahead of dependence on God, end quote. Along with financial problems, domestic issues almost always plague the newly sober man. They are the price he typically pays for his years of neglecting the family while drinking. Arguments and fault-finding are common and understandable as the family tries to come back together again, but they are, quote, are to be avoided like leprosy, end quote. Instead, the newly sober man must, quote, concentrate on his own spiritual demonstration, end quote, and with any luck, his family will recognize the changes in him and perhaps even, quote, want to join him in a better way of life, end quote. But if not, quote, let no alcoholic say he cannot recover unless he has his family back, end quote. If he begins to go down that road of complaint, quote, remind your prospect that his recovery is not dependent upon people. It is dependent upon his relationship with God, end quote. Whatever family disagreement there may be, quote, take care not to participate in their quarrels, end quote. If you have been successful in solving your own domestic problems, quote, the most you might want to do here is to share some personal stories about how that was accomplished. Real life stories are, quote, worth any amount of preaching or criticism, end quote, and they are surely the best way for you to be most helpful in these situations.
A new relationship with alcohol.
Then, in the final 11 paragraphs of this chapter, Bill Wilson suddenly shifts gears, taking his focus off the new man and the proper way of delivering the message of recovery, and begins to sell the AA member who is carrying this message all of the wonderful things that he is now free to do because he himself has had a spiritual awakening. These comments, delivered in a fairly stern and directive tone, are somewhat unexpected and may seem misplaced here, but they give Wilson the opportunity of making several interesting and important observations about alcohol and alcoholism, remarks he obviously feels are essential to any thorough discussion of how to effectively work with others. Bill starts these comments with a direct and challenging fashion.
Assuming we are spiritually fit, we can do all sorts of things alcoholics are not supposed to do. People have said we must not go where liquor is served. We must not have it in our homes. We must shun friends who drink. We must avoid moving pictures which show drinking scenes. We mustn't go into bars. Our friends must hide their bottles if we go to their houses. We mustn't think or be reminded about alcohol at all. Experience proves this is nonsense.
To Bill, it should be clear this is nonsense, and alcoholics will know it is nonsense because their experiences tell them those things are simply not true because, quote, we meet these conditions every day, end quote, without drinking. Experience has proven that, quote, any scheme of combating alcoholism which proposes to shield the sick man from temptation is doomed to failure, end quote. The solution is not to be found in isolation. An alcoholic must comfortably coexist with alcohol whenever and wherever it appears. And if a man cannot do this, then it is clear that he, quote, still has an alcoholic mind, end quote, and that there is, quote, something else the matter with his spiritual status, end quote.
So our rule is not to avoid a place where there is drinking if we have a legitimate reason for being there. You will note that we made an important qualification. Therefore, ask yourself on each occasion, have I any legitimate social, business, or personal reason for going to this place? Am I going to be helpful to anyone there? Could I be more useful or helpful by being somewhere else? If you answer these questions satisfactorily, you need have no apprehension. You may go or stay away, whatever seems best. But be sure you are on solid spiritual ground before you start, and that your motive in going is thoroughly good.
In addition, when he does find himself in a drinking situation, there's no need for the alcoholic to sit there suffering, quote, with a long face sighing over the good old days, end quote. Instead, Wilson advises, quote, if it is a happy occasion, try to increase the pleasure of those, end quote, around you, and quote, let your friends know that they do not have to change their habits on your account, end quote.
Your job now is to be at the place where you may be of maximum helpfulness to others. So never hesitate to go where there is drinking if you can be helpful. You should not hesitate to visit the most sordid spot on earth on such a mission. Keep on the firing line of life with these motives, and God will keep you unharmed.
Once again, he emphasizes that, quote, we are careful never to show intolerance or hatred of drinking as an institution. Every new alcoholic looks for this spirit among us and is immensely relieved when he finds we are not witch burners, end quote. Instead, because of this new and more open attitude towards alcohol, Wilson hopes that someday, quote, Alcoholics Anonymous will help the public to a better realization of the gravity of the alcohol problem. We shall be of little use if our attitude is one of bitterness or hostility. Drinkers will not stand for it, end quote. Some passages in this final section of Working with Others have often baffled and perplexed modern members of Alcoholics Anonymous because, on the face of it, Bill's advice contradicts more recently held beliefs in AA about the necessity of avoiding drinking situations whenever possible. Most troubling to some is Wilson's casual faith that a truly sober man should have no problem whatsoever going into bars or any other place where alcohol is a prominent part of the landscape. Later experience has suggested that, however well protected a man might be by his new spiritual condition, it is far wiser not to tempt fate by plunging into drinking situations except under specific and compelling circumstances. But an awareness of what Bill is actually talking about as he brought this chapter to a close, never explicitly mentioning, but again, easily recognized by anyone who read this in 1938, can be helpful to understanding the real purpose of this dramatic closing. Wilson's final 11 paragraphs in Working with Others are more than anything else an attempt to positively describe in the strongest possible terms the differences he sees between the beliefs and practices of Alcoholics Anonymous when compared to those so widely promulgated by the temperance and prohibition movements over the previous several decades. Bill calls these much touted temperance and prohibition beliefs about the necessity for isolation and for the complete abolition of alcoholics for alcohol, quote unquote, nonsense. Who says a recovered alcoholic can't safely be around alcohol and that the only solution is to separate him from the drinking society? That is what the evangelists, the reformers, and the witch burners have always said. But Bill reassures the alcoholic that this just isn't so. And it's true that the avoidance, isolation, and abolition ploys prescribed for so many decades as a cure for alcoholism had never worked. Ex-problem drinkers can neither ask society to ban alcohol, nor can they be expected to live their lives in isolation from it. Instead, Wilson proposes that the solution must come from within each man, and it must be based on his solid relationship with God. The old formulas and the old solutions have never worked, and they never will. But this completely new understanding of the drink problem, along with a new solution for curing it, most certainly does. Bill would have the alcoholic finally admit that the fault lies neither in alcohol itself, nor in the bottles holding the booze, nor even in the people who sell it, but rather deep within himself. Any further fight against the presence of alcohol in our lives or in the lives of the people around us is doomed to failure and must be acknowledged as such if there is to be any progress whatsoever towards a reliable and sustained recovery. Driving home this point, that the solution rests solely with the individual and the work he must do to effectively challenge and overcome his own disease, Wilson ends this chapter with a brief but potent final paragraph that he underlines for special emphasis.
After all, our troubles were of our own making. Bottles were only a symbol. Besides, we have stopped fighting anybody and anything. We have to.
He's stating in plain language that blaming outside forces is the road to failure. But if you look to yourself and rely on God's help, you will surely be invincible in all your future relations with alcohol and alcoholics.
Thank you. And that's the end of chapter 17, Working with Others. You can unmute yourself. Good stuff.
That was so good.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, David. Thank you, readers.
Thank you, Bill. That was excellent.
It's crazy good.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Bill. Wonderful. Masterpiece.
Bill, I when I was reading this, what jumped out at me straight away was the doctor's opinion in the big book. Says he was sold on the ideas contained in this book, and you highlight that so well about Wilson's business kind of acumen and how he's trying to treat the alcoholic as a project, and he's trying to sell us something. I really got that, jumped off the page for me.
Yeah. We used to have a Saturday meeting where we read the first 164 pages over and over, and we'd read a page or a page and a half every Saturday. And there was one of my friends in there, Billy was in that meeting. He would always point out Wilson's selling technique as we were going through the book, and it was like, seems like at least once a month he was saying, "Oh, there he is again. He's selling the deal. He's being the salesman." So, yeah, I mean, it's just, if that annoys you, get over it.
Did you want to come back on that, Bill? Since you've written this, did you want to mention?
Well, oh, David, please. There's a couple of things that always jump out at me when we do this. When I wrote this, and when we do this, and when I pay attention to what it says in that particular chapter, is that, I mean, when I think back on my own experience making a quote-unquote 12-step call, which is what he's talking about here, visiting somebody. Of course, these days, everybody goes to rehab and then comes out, unless you get invited in by the powers that be, which is, I've done that a couple of times to talk to people who are about to leave. You don't really get a chance to do this kind of thing. That's what the rehabs are all doing for cash. But the whole idea that or the whole instruction here that I should be talking about my experience rather than his experience or her experience, if I'm handing him off to my wife, is just I never knew that in my early days in sobriety, and I would, so how are things? Oh yeah, your wife threw you out and you lost your job and your kids won't talk to you. I would pay attention to the problems that the guy was having in hopefully in the hopes that we could underline the fact that if you stop drinking, maybe those things will go away. Wilson says that's not what you want to be doing here at all. You want to be just tell him what a bad drunk you were. Just start with your story, not his story, your story. And that's what they were doing, and that's what was working for them in those days. They didn't come on strong as preachers or evangelists. They went into these hospitals and they sat down and talked to guys. I mean, Hank Parker's just got that great thing in his the Unbeliever story about Wilson coming by and visit him, obviously more than just a couple of times, and telling him his story. That's what he was doing. That's exactly what Parker says he heard from Bill Wilson was his story. And Wilson not giving him the solution, waiting for Parkhurst to ask him for the solution. And Parkhurst thinking he's going to get a pill or something, and Bill Wilson says, God. And Hank says, and I laughed. It was just like, so I see in Hank Parker's story a confirmation that this is exactly what they were doing here. They were talking about themselves rather than whatever problems the alcoholic might have. So that was a big, I don't know that I ever really paid attention to that or saw that or heard that or, whatever. Also, there's, one of the big things, certainly in my area, is you never make a 12-step call alone. Always two people. And of course, there's no mention of that here at all. I mean, it's not even in a drive-by thing, and so there's that going on. One of the things I love that I caught here, as people who listen to me all the time know, I've got these little 3 sound bites of what I think Alcoholics Anonymous is. And the first sound bite is the diagnosis of the problem. And the diagnosis of the problem in Bill Wilson, in our book here, is that if you're a real alcoholic, you have no mental defense against first drink. Soundbite, bang. What's your problem, Bill? My problem is that I have no mental defense against the first drink. That's my problem. If I'm a real alcoholic, that's my problem. And I just loved it that it, and I don't hear that a lot in a lot of other things. As people also who know me, I complain that that's completely left out of the 12 and 12, whereas it shows up 72 times in the first 164 pages of the big book. So here it was here. Bill suggests, quote, this is on page 340. Bill suggests, quote, that you continue to speak of alcoholism as a sickness, a fatal malady, end quote, and dwell on the, quote, hopeless feature. Now, what might that hopeless feature be of the disorder caused by, oh, here it is, the queer mental condition surrounding that first drink, which prevents normal functioning of the willpower. And then he says, explain to your prospect, quote, that many are doomed. Many prospects for sobriety are doomed, end quote, because they, quote, never realize their predicament. And what's their predicament? The predicament is you have no mental defense against the first drink. End of story. We can elaborate on it once we got the story, but that's the story. And I've been going to a meeting on Thursday nights at the Bridgeport Rescue Mission, and we get 25 guys there, and half of them are from outside and half of them are residents. And so there's some real raw experience. Let me tell you, these people are all homeless and, they're just in bad shape. And I try and talk about the fact that it's your problem. Problem is you have no defense against the first drink. You got no drug, whatever your problem. It doesn't make any difference to me what your problem is. So anyhow, that was that. And as David, as you well know, I just did recently, a couple of months ago, I did a presentation on working with others. And since I've written this book, it's become clear to me that when Wilson finished writing this book, when he finished writing this chapter, that he thought he had completely outlined the 3 basic elements of, as my understanding of Alcoholics Anonymous. Number one, if you're a real alcoholic, the diagnosis, you have no mental defense against the first drink, and a two-part solution. Oh, you can get yourself a spiritual defense against the first drink if you get yourself a vital spiritual experience, number one. And when that fails, and your knowledge about the fact that you're a real alcoholic and you have no defense against the drink, when those two things fail, what do? Work with another alcoholic saves the day. That's the deal, you know? And I really don't, he didn't write the 12 steps until he's got these chapters finished. These chapters are done in the first week in November. And he doesn't write the 12 steps until the first week of December. So it came clear to me 5 years after I wrote this book and published this book that I was like, oh my God, he thought he was done. And then I went back and looked, and there was a whole bunch of letters from November from him and Hank Parkhurst and from Charles Towns that basically said, yeah, we're done. I'll be out to see you, Bob, first week in December, because I got this thing I just need to put a bow on it. We'll be fine. I will show up. Now, you said this is a short chapter, I should have another 7 or 8 pages in here about that, but I don't see that happening. First, I got to get the thing published. I'm still suing my publisher here, so we're still working on that. Yeah. Okay. I don't know.
Thank you, Bill. Before we go to Jim, I'm going to put that in the chat there, YouTube, Working with Others. It's number 7, I believe. And Bill, you also mentioned in that Hank Parkhurst, this is Hank Parkhurst's chapter, and Bill's was We Agnostics.
Yeah, I mean, if the solution is, the two-part solution is, you got to get yourself a vital spiritual experience. Wilson describes his understanding of that in We Agnostics. And if, in fact, the solution, as Dr. Silkworth and Hank Parker say, is moral psychology, work with another human being, be useful, get your head out of your butt and pay attention to other people, that's what this chapter is about. So we have a twofold solution, and we have champions on both of these in early Alcoholics Anonymous. Bill Wilson is firmly convinced that the God thing that's the essential element. And once you get that essential element, if you're tempted to drink, then you need to go work with another alcoholic to buttress that essential element. And Hank Parkhurst is the other way around. He thinks you need to be working with other people, and that gets you a spiritual awakening, and that spiritual awakening is going to keep you going and keep carrying through. So yeah, I think it's damn history of our movement. It's just fabulous, man. It's a bunch of people trying to figure it out, and of course we have a wonderful litmus test for this figure it out in AA. If you're drinking, it's not, whatever you figured out ain't working, And if you're not drinking and it's crazy whack job thing, but you're not drinking, I'm good with that. If your figure it out is completely different from my figure it out, we're good with that. The whole point is we're not trying to drink here.
Oh, wonderful. And Jim Worley's here. So Jim, you're doing a presentation tonight on that period of time, the flying blind period. Did you want to link that into what Mr. Schaberg was talking about, the flying blind period, Jim?
Yeah, the flying blind period. And then just real quickly, what we talked about in the very beginning, at the meeting before the meeting, when you asked Bill about the, when did AA start or whatever. And that's one of the things I talk about tonight, when was the first meeting? Well, that depends on when you think AA started, and there are about half a dozen reasons, historical reasons at different dates and times. And, some diehard Akron Oxford group people think it was when Jim Newton was born, so, there are all kinds of, ideas. It depends when you think and when you believe that AA started. But anyway, that's another, we'll be talking about some other myths and legends and misunderstandings. In this chapter, there are a few things that I use the word anachronistic, that just, Bill mentioned, the idea of AA common sense through the years has proven that, you know, if you had 2 weeks of sobriety, you probably shouldn't hang around a bar, you know, and, you know, so uh, some things have evolved beyond what the situation was in 1938, 39, when some things didn't exist, some things, you know, whether it talks, you know, mentions about talking to the family and helping the family out. Well, there was no Al-Anon then, you know, we did it all, you know, so there were some things that, and yet on the other hand, there are many excellent selling points, you know, in Bill's pitch that we don't use today, that are really, you know, wait till he goes on a binge and you know, he feels bad and he feels hopeless, you know, and a lot of tips in there that that people just don't use anymore. So just those two things, but great chapter. The important thing, of course, is that that was probably, I don't know, and not 90%, but you know, it was probably the program, working with others. Yeah, you had to stop drinking, you know, that always helped. But yeah, and surrender and these sorts of things. But you know, when it came to practical program, you know, working with others was the big deal. So, thanks. Bill, wanted to say-
David, I want to make one other comment before we go to general questions, and that is that one of the things I talk about, like you know, supposedly the 100 Men wrote this thing, blah blah blah. Tom Burrell, in his comment about what a mid-December meeting was like at Bill Wilson's house, says that, you know, Bill reads all this stuff, all of his yellow sheets, and they say, well, put a comma here and a question mark there. Don't put that in, put this in. So I think there were things that got shoehorned in, and there's a number of places that I talk about that things got shoehorned into our book. You know, there's like, it's going along, and then all of a sudden it's and then there's like 2 or 3 paragraphs, and then they get back to the normal flow of ideas. And it seems to me that these last 11 paragraphs was somebody said, you know, you got to put something in this book about what we can do now that we're not, you know, and how we're not like those other guys. We're different from those other guys. And it feels to me like something that was written after the first write, at least, you know, and then just kind of shoehorned in, just stuck in the back of this thing. Because it's like a grinding of gears, man, of shit when you're shifting gears there, where he goes from what you're talking to a guy who's still drinking, for instance, you know, or in a rehab, to oh, by the way, you don't have to worry about a lot of it. Let me tell you what you can do. You know, it's like, really, it was just, so those things happened. I do believe those things happened. I think Wilson was in fact told or suggested to him that he should change something or put something extra in. And this looks to me like one of those places. I don't have any documentation on that because we don't have early versions of this chapter, but I wouldn't be surprised if an early version of this chapter didn't have those 11 paragraphs in it, or it was just a little thing. And somebody said, no, you got to blow that thing up so people know what the hell we're talking about here. So anyhow.
Wow. Great stuff. Thank you for that. Thank you, Jim. If you've got a question you'd like to ask Bill, raise your hand, please. And also you can contact Bill. I'll put his email in the chat as well shortly. Gigi, thanks for reading first today, Gigi.
Thank you for inviting me to. Thank you,
Pleasure.
David.
Pleasure.
And thank you, Bill and Jim, of course, and Kid, who is no longer here. So the word that really jumped out at me this reading, because it's such strong language, is the word witch burners. And I'm just really kind of, you know, it's always kind of impressed me. It's very, very strong language. And I think of Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, let me just jump over to page 345 and read these 2 lines. Who says a recovered alcoholic can't safely be around alcohol, and that the only solution is to separate himself from a drinking society? That is what the evangelists, the reformers, and the witch burners have always said. But Bill reassures the alcoholic that it just isn't so. So witch burners, I'm assuming he's aligning with temperance and prohibition beliefs, referring to the actual alcoholics. But didn't alcoholics need to take alcohol when they were doing 12-step calls? Didn't they need to take alcohol with them in case somebody was in danger of maybe seizing or having severe effects from withdrawal from alcohol?
My understanding, and Jim might have something to contribute. My understanding is that that was absolutely common. That people would have a pint in the trunk of the car, kind of thing. That if they needed to go back out to the car and get the pint and pour a little bit in the guy so they could get him to the hospital, they would do that. They would do that. That was now, of course, today, if I caught anybody I sponsored driving around with a pint of whiskey in the trunk of their car, I'd be. You don't want to be around for that conversation, let me tell you, you know. But again, it was what they were doing. It was what they were trying to do. You know, it's like, you know, okay, this is working, and then they find. I mean, I would say today it doesn't work that much. It's like, you know, do you have? It's one of those questions, Gigi. Like, do you have booze in your house or don't you have booze in your house? If you're not drinking and your wife's not drinking, why do you have booze in your house? Should you have booze in your house? Maybe you don't have booze in your blah blah blah, that kind of thing. You know, there's no booze in my house. And if somebody comes over to my house for a party, and they bring a bottle of wine, we're not opening it. We're putting it back in their car. You know, that's the way it goes. We don't have booze in our house. And is that a little too strident on that issue? Yeah, maybe. But I haven't had a drink in 44 years, so I'm going to stick with it.
Thank you, Gigi.
Oh, and Gigi, I can see, you know, I haven't really. You're so good at this stuff. You really are. The witch burner is like a witch burner. You know, you just went for the women right there. Witch burner. You know, and but they don't want to say the Inquisition because then they're castigating, you know, Roman Catholicism. You know, however bad that might have been. Whereas you can talk about the witch burners. Nobody believes we should be burning witches. You know, I live in Fairfield, Connecticut. We didn't burn witches in this area or even up at Salem. We hung them. And there was a woman hung on the town green here in Fairfield, Connecticut in 1694, I believe, as a witch. And my wife, she's had 2 cats that follow her around just everywhere. You know what I say? Honey, if it was the late 1600s, you and that cat would be hung on the town green because they talk to each other and you know, it's like, yeah.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Gigi. Hope the leg is getting better, Gigi. Tim L.
My cat and I talk to each other too. Early in the reading today, and I don't have the book here in front of me, when he was talking about the potential prospect that you might have some chance to save from alcoholism, I think he used the term if the person has some spiritual characteristic or nature. It was very early in the reading. Is that pretty much Bill Wilson saying, you know, from his perspective that you have to find, you know, the God thing, the higher power God, that, you know, if you didn't have somewhat of a spiritual characteristic, you probably were just hopeless. Is that pretty much what Bill was saying?
No, I'm not sure, Tim. But no, I don't think so. I think there was enough guys coming in that were atheists and agnostics who had stayed sober, who had gotten sober and stayed sober, that he didn't think, you know, having no religious background or no spiritual background was a deal, you know, was just a fatal problem. And I think what you might be talking about starts on the bottom of 338 and goes to the top of 339. It says, you suggest the man carrying the message should first talk to the prospect's wife and, quote, get an idea of his behavior, his problems, his background, the seriousness of his condition, and his religious leanings. Not spiritual leanings, but his religious leanings, because Wilson certainly considered those 2 things, you know, joined at the hip. You know, if you're a believer in God, then you had a spiritual life, and that's what you need to be doing. So I noticed that his religious leanings because I actually went online while Jim was reading something else and said, I asked AI, how many people in the United States, what percentage of people in the United States today attend church every week? And the number I got back was 21%. But that wasn't the number in 1938. People went to church every week in 1938. I don't know what the number was in 1938, but I'll guarantee it wasn't 21%. So it's a common thing to question somebody about, what's this guy? Does this guy go to church? How often does he go to church? How big, and what church does he go to? Because it makes a difference, And it could be one of those crazy Roman Catholics, because these guys are all Protestants, they're all Calvinists. And anyhow, it's just, yeah, I noticed that as we went through here, so much so that I actually went online and asked what percentage of people were. I frequently say, if you go to a cocktail party in 1938 and you meet some new person, some new guy, you ask him, oh, here's your wife. How many kids do you have? What do you do for a living? What church do you go to? Because everybody went to a church. And even if they didn't go every week, they told you they went.
And what's interesting, I noticed recently, following a few people that are kind of Bible historians, and they're both somewhat, agnostic or atheist. One of them posted a thing that, they go to church. So it's not like everybody that's agnostic or atheist doesn't participate in some form of religious activity, or church activity. So it's interesting.
Gene from Virginia just posted 78% went to worship in 1930s. So sounds about right. And yeah, Tim, for instance, my brother John goes to the Universalist Unitarian Church, the UU Church, and you can believe anything you want or not, and be a very active member in the UUs. And my brother John's been very, very happy. We're all raised Roman Catholic. So, in the 1950s, pre-Vatican II Roman Catholicism. So, but John's found himself a very happy home. He's been there for 30 years probably, and he's really, really happy with it. And I'm happy that he's happy with it, because it makes him a better person. That's where he goes for his spiritual life. Identify the places where you encountered his spiritual and go there often, and that's where John goes.
Yeah, you don't fit in there real well unless you're a loving, caring, somewhat of a humanitarian, but you can not believe God exists at all, and still be of that characteristic of loving, caring humanity and fit right in.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tim. And we got John Kerr with us in Florida.
Hello, gentlemen. Alcoholics. One of the lines in the big book that always threw me, it's on page 98. It says, the minute we put our work on a service plane, the alcoholic commences to rely upon our assistance rather than upon God. And I thought, what isn't that one of the legacies, service? And then I got the book that started it all, and that's what you quote here, is that the minute we put our work on a social service plane, and that made a lot more sense. And in the book that started it all, social is crossed out, and then it was erased, whatever the cross out was, and there's a word above it that never got in here. So I could see the difference. I mean, it really straightened out. One of the many things I liked about your book is when you quote the manuscript. You have everything underlined that was underlined. And if you quote the big book, you have it as italics, which it came out to be, because underlining something means italics to the typesetter. So, but that word never got into, it made a lot more sense when we put it on a service plane, a social service plane, relying on us for food and housing and everything else. So anyway, thanks a lot for everything.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, can I make a comment based? Well, I'd read it before, but Bill did a good study on it. I've always, that never made sense to me either, John. It talks about on a service plane. Well, isn't that what we're all about? And that was one of the words that Bill changed in As Bill Sees It. And if you look for that quote in As Bill Sees It, you'll see that he changed the word from service to material. Not a service plane, but when we work on a material plane, and that's just one of the many that Bill did a whole study in comparison of the of as Bill sees it quotes with the
Quotes.
with the big, yeah, with the 164 page quotes. Yeah. Yeah. So, but that's, and it's one of the words he would have changed, and he finally did it. So,
Good call, Jim. I didn't notice that one. I mean, I've documented them all, but I didn't notice that one. That's good. Yeah.
yeah, it was just something that always bothered me about the big book. I mean, it just kind of, when we put it on a service plane, well, that just, and so it made sense to me when he made that change.
Well, you just heard Mr. Sherberg is growing in understanding. I like that. You like to see historians are growing in understanding still. I love that. Jim, Worley, I just think Jim is going to do these for us in July. So, Jim, you're going to be talking about, I haven't fixed it yet, but that's the last one.
Oh, okay. Yeah. On the first one is going to be talking about recovery success rates in AA. And then the middle of the month, it's going to be the Big Book Awakening. That is the period in AA history that birthed people like Mac Cheater in Canada and Joe and Charlie that we're familiar with. And, the Big Book Awakening in the mid 70s to 80s. And when, what is considered normal standard in AA today of, your sponsor takes you through the big book and you read it and you work the steps with him, pretty much didn't exist for the first 40 years of AA and came into being during the Big Book Awakening in the Joe and Charlie period. Then in the 31st of the month, there's the title is Myths, Legends, and Changes in the Big Book.
So let's put that down in notes for your diary. July. I mean, we'll have Mr. Sherberg soon as well. We're going to we're working on getting him to do something for us. Well, we'll definitely be doing something in November on him. We'll be doing it because every year we try to do something on writing the big book, The Creation of AA. Bill, I think we're finished. I think we're done here. Is anyone like?
I do, but look at what Gigi just posted. The plain language big book uses the word. Come on. Here we go. Plain language big book uses the word charity instead of service. In case you're interested. Now, how cool is that? So,
charity. Okay.
Social service, material, or charity. Good stuff. Thank you, Gigi.
Wow. So we will close, Bill, in our traditional way now. And again, look, thank you ever so much. It's great that you're committed to this for us, and we really appreciate it. Jim, you too, of course, as always, have a tendency to take things for granted. I try not to when I do my program. I appreciate, I really do, because my growth is exponential since we started this era, this period of AA. It's just incredible meeting people like yourselves, really, truly. I appreciate AA more now than I've ever did. Wonderful. Bill Sherberg, we're going to go back to you to close with the errata, and I'm looking for the errata. So I'll hear this. I see it. So we're going to close with that. Even Gata, I said the errata. Even Gata, I'm going to close with.
Gets worse the older you get, David. Let me tell you.
I'm prepared. I'm getting prepared.
Thanks everybody for being here today, and that was fun. That was fun. I enjoyed it. Thank you. Let's have a moment of silence, and I'll close with the evening Gatha. Let me respectfully remind you, William, life and death are of supreme importance. Time swiftly passes by, and opportunity is lost. Each of us should strive to awaken to the present moment. Take heed. Tonight, this very night, your days are diminished by one. Do not squander what little bit of life you have left. Amen.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Bill. What a great talk.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Off to dinner.
Thank you.
Bye.
Happy Memorial Day, everyone.
everybody.
Bill, that was so good, so fresh. It just felt so new. Thank you.
Out.
Now we got to get ready for Jim Worley now. which is good. We have that to look forward to. Built on this, I think I'm going to stay up for it. I'm definitely going to stay up for it. I'm going over to that.
Yeah,
I want more. I want more.
This presentation, Jim, is not going to be recorded, is it?
Jim is not here at the moment.
Oh, right.
just
Okay.
Suzanne.
Yeah.
I don't know, Susan. I don't know that, but
it doesn't say on the flyer.
It doesn't say on the flyer. I don't know that group. What's the name of the group? Design for Living or something? Design for Living.
Yeah.
Maybe they have a website.
It's too late for me. I'm sorry to say.
I know you're an hour ahead of us, even. Yeah.
I always want to follow Bill. No, Jim, I should say.
Jim,
but I listened to Jim. I listened to Jim earlier. He had a great presentation on Hank.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What's
Hank?
That was one of the first I heard him do, actually. Yeah, that's incredible.
Canarian International Group.
Oh, the Canarian. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
who did? Bill spoke that.
Yeah.
Bill
Bill had a presentation on. He has that presentation on Hank on his YouTube, so it's not all lost. But this was somehow I don't know if he added information, but some information was new for me.
He's great live though, isn't he?
We always learn something new. Yeah,
incredible. He does ad lib as well when he goes through it. He gets into the moment. He does get into the moment. I want to say hello to Zels. Who's Zels? I haven't seen Zels before. Have I seen Zels before? Am I pronouncing that right? Zelda, Zels. Hello. Would you like to say hello?
Yeah, it's Zels.
Hi, I don't think we've met. I don't think we've met. Have we met? I don't think so.
Maybe not. I'm in Seattle.
Right, you haven't been here before, have you? Have you been here before?
No, I haven't.
No, yeah.
Welcome.
Welcome.
I was told about this, and so I like to find as many different ways of learning about this. I'm 81, but I didn't come into this until 75.
Oh, wow.
And so I came in late, and I just gobble up all of the information. I've got time on my hands, and I have, I'm just I am almost. It is so interesting to hear the different approaches and the different things that people have to say.
Yes.
And I don't have any one way or another.
And you're not compelled to do either. You choose your own way, isn't that right? And this is wonderful.
Yes. Yeah.
You take what you want out of it. I'm with you on that. Otherwise, as he said, don't talk down to any alcoholic from any moral hilltop or something like that.
Yeah. Exactly.
Good night. Again, welcome.
See you, Jeannie. See you. Yeah, Zell, nice meeting you. Listen, we're here again on Friday nights. We have a presentation. I don't know if you want. Are you able to screen grab things on? Can you do that thing yet?
What's that?
Can you screen grab stuff on the internet? If I put up this flyer,
I don't know.
Well, let me just if you want to just let me just you don't have to rush yourself. Hold on a second. I'll put this up for you. If you want, just write this one down. Every Friday night, our time, I guess, it's 5 p.m. on the East Coast. So on just go over the East Coast. So 5 p.m. on the East Coast time every Friday, we do a history meeting.
Okay.
So the same code.
And it's the same, all the same information.
Same password, same code, and it's just a difference in the time. It's the same time.
But it's at 7:30 on Friday night.
It'd be 5 p.m. on East Coast.
On the East Coast, what would it be on the West Coast then?
On the West Coast, you're 8 hours. You're 8 hours behind, so that would be 2 p.m.
2 p.m.
Yeah, 2 p.m. That right on Pacific time. Yeah,
I think that's right.
Okay. Yeah, 2 p.m. That's what I have it today.
Yeah, same exactly.
There you go.
So that's it. So that if you start on that, so Fridays and Saturday, you can do that. So it's the
I
same
can
time.
see. Are they both different?
Yeah, the one on Friday varies because we have different aspects of the history of AA. Jim Worley is just there with us. He does a lot of our presentations. So he could be talking about, like last night, he was talking about the recovered people as wounded healers, for example, and he looks into the history of AA. and the backstory and how it gathered a lot of its information and how Bill Wilson modified it to work
right.
for an alcoholic.
Yeah, well, I can come to the at 2:00.
So
I can remember that well.
You just put them down Fridays and Saturdays. And I don't know if you've heard of Sonic, but this is on tonight with the Design for Living group. So they have that on tonight. So if you want to get more information on the subject matters that we've just been talking about, Jim goes, the guy, Jim Murley, he goes right into this now tonight, the flying blind period.
Good.
That's at your time. It is going to be at Central Time, Pacific Time, 5 p.m. your time.
Yes.
5 p.m.
5 p.m. your time now tonight. So if you got,
And
it's a different code though. Be careful with the code. Look at, can you see the code there? So
Board.
If you got a biro, have you got a pen handy?
Code.
Oh yeah, I do. Let me get my.
Let me read it out. Let me read the code out for you because you need to. It's a different.
Okay, what
Right,
is
you
it?
put in 6, 7, 9, 5, 5, 0, 2, 7, 2, 4.
Oh, you want it? Something came in the way. I didn't get all of
Okay, so
that. It's
no
6,
worries.
7, 9, 5.
6, 7, 9, 5, 5, 0, 2, 7, 2, 4.
Okay, I'll repeat back. It's
Yep.
6, 7, 9, 5, 0, 6,
No.
7, 2, 4.
No, scratch that. Scratch it. Let's go. If you got it, let's start again. So 6, 7, 9.
Okay.
Yeah. 5, 5, 0.
Okay.
2, 7, 2, 4.
Okay, now I got it. Let me
Brilliant.
go back again.
And
6,
your-
7, 9,
Mm-hmm.
5, 5, 0,
Mm-hmm.
2, 7, 2, 4.
Brilliant. And the password is
Yes.
999.
Well, that's easy.
5,
So
356.
it's
999
what?
356.
99356.
No,
Okay.
no.
It's,
999 356. Yeah.
3, 5,
6.
6.
That's it.
So it's 10 and 4. No, 10 and 6.
Yes. 360. Yes,
And that's the standard. Okay.
that's the standard one. And that's on at 5 p.m. Pacific time. And it's going to be
And that is at what time?
5 p.m. on your time, Pacific time.
And on Friday?
No, that's tonight. You've that later on. No,
Oh, that's tonight.
that's in a couple of hours. That's an hour and a half.
Oh, okay. I got it.
You can just build on what you've heard here today, because this presentation will be covering that period of time between 1935 and 1939, which
Oh, good. I like that because that gets into the period of the Nazis, and I'm just fascinated by how
Let's
that
not-
was handled in the United States.
right. Well, let's not go into that now. But I hear what you're saying, though. It's fascinating stuff. Henry Ford was involved, but anyway, let's not go into that.
Well, we don't have to get into that.
No,
I
no,
just
we
say
won't
I'm
now, we won't
fascinated by it.
But listen, nice meeting you.
Yes, nice meeting you.
Keep coming back to us, and it's good to have you here. If you're interested,
I
in
certainly
hearing-
will.
Yeah, likewise.
Okay.
Thank you, Zell. And you're in Seattle. I'm trying to remember that.
Okay.
Man, and
Take care.
You too. Thank you. And Dina, I'm going to go now, but you're okay.
Yes.
You
Yes.
enjoyed that? You did?
It's fabulous.
Fabulous. What was the takeout for? What was the takeout you got?
I loved it all, but I wanted to bring up something about Carrie Nations. She's the one that had the intolerance and the hatred, and so was supposedly the witch burner. Carrie Nations. She was the woman with a hatchet. I learned that on one of my other history meetings, but with all you being historians, I didn't want to bring that up.
Well, you could have, but it's not. What's that got to do with it, though? No, that's just with the witch burner.
It's about the witch burner.
Oh,
And I was stupid, so I didn't want to waste anybody's
was
time.
she-
And then it's dinner time.
well, no, it doesn't matter. But the thing is, there's nothing stupid to be brought up in these kind of meetings. You must remember that. Don't think, whatever you bring up is relevant to you. That's all that matters. The rest of the
Okay.
stuff, the rest of the, we're not playing to the gallery. Let other people do their own inventory. But we're back tomorrow with the discussion meeting, remember? So
Yeah. All right.
discussion meeting. And Zell, if you wanted to come back tomorrow, listen, I don't want to bombard you with too much information, but tomorrow at your time is going to be your
2
time.
o'clock?
Your time tomorrow at 12 noon.
High noon.
Yeah, but at high noon tomorrow, I'm going to overwhelm you. It's the same code as you got on tonight, same password you got on tonight. Just remember that. See you, Dina.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so the same numbers tonight
Yeah,
as that I'm going to have for Friday. Is that right?
yeah, the same numbers that you have for Fridays and Saturdays, and that'll be on tomorrow at. Now, notice the time is 8. It's 12 noon your time.
Okay.
And we just have more. We have more of a discussion where you can bring up the stuff you mentioned, and you can talk
Okay.
about stuff like that rather than just sticking to the script of history.
Well, that's a lot of numbers here.
I know. That's why I
I
don't know.
might get them all. I might not.
Well, this is it. As long as you remember the one for tonight, and then you have the one for this one for next week. That's all.
Yeah. So if I get this one tonight, again, 999-356.
That's the passcode. Yes.
Yeah, and that's at 5 p.m.
Yeah,
tonight.
but the actual number to get into the meeting is 679-550-2724.
550. Okay.
No, let me just say that to you. Yeah, the number to get into the meeting, the meeting identity is 679-550-2724.
Oh,
Then they'll ask you for a
274. Okay.
password to let you enter the meeting, and that is 999-356.
Okay. So I've got to get rid of stuff here. Good grief.
All right. Nice
So
meeting you.
incompetent.
I'll see you next time.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.